What if the most dangerous kind of rebellion isn't the one born of ignorance, but the one led by someone who knows exactly what they're doing? We talk a lot about Lucifer, the morning star who fell from pride, the bright one who couldn't bear to kneel. His story has been painted on cathedral ceilings, carved into cathedral doors, embedded so deeply in Western imagination that the word fallen angel conjures his face before any other. But there is an older story, one that predates the Lucifer tradition by centuries, one buried in a text that was removed from the biblical canon, hidden in Ethiopian monasteries, and then dramatically rediscovered among the Dead Sea Scrolls in the caves of Qumran. And in that older story, the leader of the rebellion is not Lucifer. His name is Semyaza. Picture this, a mountain summit at night, not a metaphor, a real mountain. Mount Hermon, at the northern edge of the ancient land of Canaan, its peak rising over 9,000 feet into the darkness. The stars blaze overhead with an intensity most of us have never seen, because there are no cities here, no electricity, no light pollution, just the ancient sky, the same sky those stars once helped to govern. 200 beings stand on that summit. They are not human. They are watchers, divine beings, tasked with observing the world below, with keeping vigil over the children of men. Their watch has brought them close to something they were never supposed to want. They have seen the daughters of men. They have felt something that divine beings are not supposed to feel. And now they have gathered on this specific mountain, on this specific night, to make a decision that every single one of them knows cannot be unmade. Their leader speaks first. His name is Semyaza. And he says something extraordinary, something that sets him apart from every other rebel in the history of religious tradition. He doesn't claim righteousness. He doesn't argue that God is wrong. He doesn't pretend that what they're about to do is anything other than what it is. He says, "I fear that perhaps you will not agree to do this deed, and I alone will have to pay the penalty for this great sin." He knows it is a great sin. He says so, out loud, to 200 fellow divine beings who are about to follow him off the edge of everything. And then he asks them to swear, an oath of mutual damnation, a pact of collective transgression. "Let us all swear an oath," he says, "and bind one another with curses so as not to alter this plan." They swear, they descend, and the world is never the same. Today, we're going to explore the story of Semyaza, not just as mythology, not just as theology, but as a window into some of the deepest questions human beings have ever asked about leadership, guilt, desire, and the psychology of collective wrongdoing. Why does the Book of Enoch give us a rebel leader who openly confesses the magnitude of his transgression before committing it? Why does Semyaza's punishment differ so dramatically from that of his lieutenant Azazel? And what does that difference tell us? And why has this ancient, troubling figure been so thoroughly erased from mainstream religion, while his shadow stretches across 2,000 years of demonology, mysticism, and esoteric tradition? The story of Semyaza is the story of the first leader who said, "I know this will destroy me. I know it will destroy us. Let's do it anyway." That story is a great deal older than you think, and it is a great deal stranger. Let's begin with the book itself. because you cannot understand Semyaza without understanding the strange survival story of the text that preserves his name. The Book of Enoch, formerly known as First Enoch, or the Ethiopic Enoch, is one of the most significant religious texts you've probably never read. It claims to record the visions and journeys of Enoch, the great-grandfather of Noah, a man whom the book of Genesis describes in the briefest, most cryptic of terms. He walked with God, and then he was no more because God took him. That single line, 7 words in the original Hebrew, launched a tradition. If Enoch didn't die, if God simply took him, then perhaps he went somewhere. Perhaps he saw things. Perhaps he wrote them down. The Book of Enoch claims to be exactly that record. It is vast, strange, and ancient. Scholars date its earliest sections, including the Watcher narrative that concerns us, to the 3rd or 4th century BCE, though some argue for earlier oral traditions behind the written text. It was widely known in the ancient Jewish world. It is quoted directly in the New Testament letter of Jude. Early church fathers knew it, cited it, wrestled with it. And then, somewhere around the 4th century CE, it was excluded from the emerging Christian biblical canon. The Western Church set it aside. The Eastern Orthodox traditions largely followed. It survived in a single complete form only in Ge'ez, the liturgical language of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, which never abandoned it, and which treats it, to this day, as canonical scripture. For the Western world, the Book of Enoch was a rumor, a ghost, a name attached to fragments and quotations for more than 1,000 years. Then, in 1773, a Scottish explorer named James Bruce returned from Ethiopia with 3 complete manuscripts. The scholar Richard Lawrence translated the first English version in 1821. A strange, archaic, celestial world opened up, and at its center was the story of the Watchers and their leader, Semyaza. The discovery was seismic for scholars. The confirmation came in the 20th century, when fragments of the Book of Enoch were found among the Dead Sea Scrolls at Qumran. 11 separate manuscripts, some predating the Ethiopian versions by over a millennium. The Watcher story was there. The Mount Hermon oath was there. Semyaza was there. This is not a medieval invention. This is not a marginal curiosity. This is one of the oldest extended narratives about angelic rebellion in the entire tradition, and its account is radically, disquietingly different from anything you'll find in mainstream religious teaching. So what does it actually say? The relevant section begins at chapter 6 of First Enoch. And the first thing that strikes any careful reader is the precision. This is not vague mythological gesture. The text names names. It says that in the days when humans began to multiply on the earth and daughters were born to them, the Watchers, the Bene Ha-Elohim, the sons of God, saw the daughters of men and found them beautiful and desired them. And their leader Semyaza said to them, "Come, let us choose wives for ourselves from the daughters of men, and let us beget children." But then, crucially, he paused. He looked at the 200 gathered around him, and he said those words that echo through the entire tradition. "I fear you will not agree to this deed, and I alone will pay the penalty for this great sin." He is afraid of betrayal. He is afraid of being the only one to fall. And so he demands an oath, not because he doubts the desire of the others, but because desire alone is not enough. He needs commitment. He needs them bound. They swore, all 200 of them, upon Mount Hermon, and the text gives us their names. 18 chieftains listed by name, including Semyaza at the top, and, significantly, a figure named Azazel, who will become the story's second protagonist and its most theologically troubling element. The names matter. Scholars have spent decades analyzing them, finding echoes in other ancient Near Eastern traditions, arguing over their etymology, their origins, their cultural contexts. But what matters for our purposes is the structure they create. This is not an anonymous mob. This is a named conspiracy, an organized rebellion, a deliberate, premeditated collective transgression led by a chief who spoke the truth about its nature before it began. Why does this matter? Because it means the Watcher tradition is doing something very different from most of the theological storytelling we inherit. It is not interested in temptation. It is not interested in deception. The angels were not tricked. They were not deceived about what they were doing or why it was wrong. They simply wanted something they were not supposed to want, and their leader organized them into wanting it together, irrevocably, with an oath. That is a far more troubling portrait of moral failure than anything a talking serpent in a garden has ever offered us. Here is a question that scholars have found endlessly generative, and that popular retellings almost always skip over. Why Mount Hermon? The text is specific. Not a mountain, not a high place. Mount Hermon, a real geographical location, identifiable on any modern map, sitting at the border of what is today Syria, Lebanon, and Israel. Its highest peak rises to just over 9,000 feet. It has been a sacred site since at least the Bronze Age. Ancient Near Eastern inscriptions have been found on its slopes. In some traditions, it marked the boundary between the human world and the divine realm above. A threshold place, a place between. The name itself is instructive. The Hebrew word haram, from which Hermon may derive, carries connotations of sacred prohibition, of something set apart, something that belongs to the divine and is therefore forbidden to ordinary approach. There is also a play, visible in the structure of First Enoch itself, with the Hebrew word haram, the oath of mutual destruction, the vow of total commitment that bound the Watchers to their pact. They swore an oath of haram on Mount Hermon. The text is making a point about place and act, about how transgression chooses its location deliberately. What does it mean to take this oath seriously as narrative theology? It means the text is telling us something precise about how collective wrongdoing works. Semyaza did not simply lead 200 beings down from heaven by the force of his charisma. He constructed a mechanism of mutual binding. He understood, with a clarity that feels almost modern in its sophistication, that desire alone is not sufficient for sustained transgression. Desire is private. Desire can be repented. Desire can be suppressed by the individual in moments of reconsideration. But an oath is public. An oath is witnessed. An oath creates accountability, not upward accountability to God or conscience, but horizontal accountability to each other. Once you have sworn in the presence of your 200 companions, the cost of individual defection becomes unbearable. You cannot be the one who breaks the pact. The social bond of the oath, even an oath to do something wrong, holds you more reliably than your own desire could. This is, If you want to read it psychologically rather than theologically, a near-perfect description of how group transgression actually functions. Sociologists and psychologists studying everything from corporate fraud to wartime atrocities have noted precisely this mechanism. The critical transition point is rarely the individual decision to do wrong. It is the moment when the transgression becomes collective, when it is sanctioned by the group, when individual guilt is diffused into shared responsibility, and individual hesitation is silenced by the social cost of defection. Semyaza knew this, or rather, the author of the Book of Enoch attributed this knowledge to Semyaza. Whether that says something about ancient insight into human psychology, or something about the sophistication of 3rd century BCE Jewish theological thinking, is perhaps not a distinction that matters. What matters is that the text gives us a figure who is, in modern terms, a remarkable portrait of the architect of collective transgression. He is not evil in the simple sense. He is not motivated by malice toward humanity or rebellion against God's order from principle. He is motivated by desire, specifically the desire for connection, for intimacy, for something the divine realm apparently could not offer. And having acknowledged the wrongness of that desire, he transforms it from a private temptation into a shared commitment, from a moment of weakness into an irreversible act of collective will. The mountain is where the private becomes public. The oath is the mechanism. And once the oath is sworn, the descent is inevitable. They came down on the slopes of Ardis, a place name that has generated its own scholarly literature, and they took wives from among the daughters of men, all 200 of them, every chieftain, every named figure, every watcher who had raised his hand on the summit of Hermon. And what followed was, in the Book of Enoch's telling, catastrophic. The union of the watchers and the daughters of men produced children. The Book of Enoch describes these children in terms that strain at the boundaries of imagination. Giants, 300 cubits tall in some manuscripts, numbers so outlandish that scholars have argued they represent something other than physical dimensions, something about proportion, about beings whose appetites and capacities were simply incommensurate with the world they inhabited. These are the Nephilim, a word that appears in Genesis 6:4, that brief, cryptic passage which forms the canonical bridge to the flood narrative. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans and had children by them. They were the heroes of old, men of renown. Genesis gives us one tantalizing sentence and moves on. The Book of Enoch gives us the full account. The giants ate everything. When the food ran out, they turned on humanity. When humanity was consumed, they turned on the animals. When the animals were gone, they turned on each other. And alongside the physical devastation, the watchers themselves had begun teaching humanity things that were not meant to be taught. Here, Azazel emerges as a central figure in his own right. And this is where the dual tradition problem that scholars have wrestled with becomes impossible to ignore. In the Semyaza tradition, the primary sin is the act of transgressing the boundary between divine and human, of taking wives and producing these catastrophically disproportionate children. The knowledge problem is secondary. But the Azazel tradition introduces something different. Azazel, whose name is the same as the scapegoat figure in Leviticus 16, and that connection is almost certainly not accidental, taught humanity the arts of war. He showed men how to make swords, knives, shields, and breastplates. He showed women the arts of seduction and adornment, the use of cosmetics and jewelry, the beautifying of the eyelids. Other watchers, in passages that follow, taught astrology, enchantments, the cutting of roots, and the knowledge of plants. The question that scholars have asked for over a century is this: are Semyaza and Azazel two separate traditions that have been woven together in the final text? Does the Semyaza narrative represent an older layer concerned with the boundary violation, the sexual transgression, while the Azazel narrative represents a different concern, one about knowledge, about technology, about the premature or inappropriate revelation of divine secrets to humanity? The answer most scholars now favor is yes. These are almost certainly two distinct source traditions that have been merged, not always seamlessly, into the narrative we have. The seams show Semyaza is named as the leader and given the most elaborate characterization: the speech before the oath, the psychological complexity. But Azazel receives the harshest punishment. And in chapter 10, God's indictment of Azazel carries a weight that arguably exceeds anything directed at Semyaza. The whole earth has been corrupted through the works that were taught by Azazel. To him ascribe all sin. To him ascribe all sin. Not to Semyaza, the leader, not to the 200 who swore the oath, to Azazel, the teacher, the one who gave humanity weapons. This is a theological statement of extraordinary reach, and it tells us something important about what the authors of this tradition were most concerned about. The union of divine and human, disturbing as it is, represents a kind of category violation. But the transmission of forbidden knowledge, the weaponization of humanity, represents something more, like a civilizational catastrophe. Azazel gave men the means to kill each other efficiently. The Book of Enoch's indictment suggests this was, in some theological accounting, worse than anything the giants did. Meanwhile, the archangels, Michael, Uriel, Gabriel, and Raphael, look down from heaven and see what is happening. Their report to God is one of the most vivid passages in the entire book. The earth has cried out. The sound of the suffering of those on earth has ascended to the gates of heaven. The souls of the slain cry out and plead. And the 4 archangels present the case to God and await instruction. What follows is the divine response, and the beginning of what will become Semyaza's peculiar punishment. God's response, as recorded in 1 Enoch chapters 10 and following, is distributed across the 4 archangels as a set of individual commissions. To Raphael, go to Azazel, bind him hand and foot, cast him into the darkness, open a hole in the desert, in Dudael, wherever that is, and throw him in. Cover him with rough and jagged rocks. Let him stay there until the day of judgment, when he will be thrown into fire. The image is brutally concrete. Azazel is not elevated into cosmic symbol. He is stuffed into a hole in the ground, covered with rocks, and left there in the dark. The punishment is almost insultingly physical for a divine being, as though the point is not merely containment, but humiliation. To Gabriel, go to the children of the Watchers, the bastard spirits, the giants, set them against each other. Let them destroy themselves in mutual slaughter. The Nephilim are not imprisoned. They are turned on each other and consumed. To Michael, go to Semyaza. And here, the text takes one of those turns that has fascinated scholars and troubled theologians for generations. Semyaza's punishment is different from Azazel's. He is to be bound, but not buried. In some readings of the relevant passages, Semyaza is suspended between heaven and earth, his face turned down toward the ground, held in a state of permanent suspension that is neither imprisonment nor freedom, neither the divine realm he abandoned, nor the earth he descended to. Other traditions elaborate this into an astronomical image. Semyaza is the constellation Orion, or is connected to it. The great hunter hung permanently in the sky, visible to every generation of human beings as a reminder of the fall. His very visibility becomes the punishment. He cannot descend further. He cannot return. He hangs between, seen but unseeing, present but absent, the leader frozen at the moment of his transgression. This difference in punishment, the hole in the ground for Azazel, the suspension between worlds for Semyaza, is theologically significant in ways that scholars have not fully agreed upon. One reading: the difference reflects the difference in sin. Azazel's sin was downward. He gave humanity weapons. He brought divine knowledge into the dirt. He corrupted the earth from the earth's level. His punishment mirrors his crime, down into the ground, covered with rocks, earthward. Semyaza's sin was the transgression of the boundary, neither fully divine nor fully earthly after his descent. His punishment mirrors that crime, suspended at the boundary, neither here nor there, the living embodiment of the category violation he committed. Another reading: the two punishments reflect the two source traditions. Azazel's definitive imprisonment under the earth is the punishment tradition associated with the knowledge and weapons narrative. Semyaza's more ambiguous fate, suspended, visible, astronomical, belongs to the boundary transgression narrative, where the point is not eradication but permanent, visible reminder. A third reading, and perhaps the most theologically rich, Semyaza's punishment is the natural consequence of his sin in a way that Azazel's is not. Azazel gave humanity weapons, and weapons are still here. The punishment has to be external, imposed, coercive. But Semyaza's desire was for union, for belonging, for a place between. His punishment simply gives him what his desire made inevitable: a permanent betweenness, a permanent suspension, belonging nowhere, seen by everyone, able to reach neither the heaven he left nor the earth he sought. He wanted to cross the line, and so the line became his permanent address. There is something in that reading, the idea that transgression contains its own punishment in the structure of what it is, that resonates far beyond the specifics of ancient Jewish angelology. It speaks to something true about how certain desires, when pursued across certain boundaries, don't simply destroy what they aimed at, they destroy the capacity for belonging entirely. But before we go further into the theological resonances of Semyaza's fate, we have to deal with the other figure in this story who has been waiting with considerable patience in the wings. Here is the problem in its starkest form. The Book of Enoch gives the Watcher rebellion two leaders, and they don't quite fit together. Semyaza is introduced first. He is named chief. He gives the speech before the oath. He organizes the conspiracy on Mount Hermon. He is, by all narrative measures, the protagonist of the fall. But when God assigns the harshest punishment, it goes to Azazel. When the text wants to identify the ultimate source of human corruption, it points to Azazel. To him ascribe all sin, not to Semyaza, not even to the collective of 200, to Azazel. How do we reconcile this? The most historically persuasive answer, as I mentioned earlier, is source theory. These are two originally separate traditions that have been combined. In one tradition, older, concerned with sexual boundary transgression, Semyaza leads an angelic rebellion that results in the Nephilim. In another tradition, concerned with forbidden knowledge and technological corruption, Azazel is the central figure, the fallen teacher who arms humanity against itself. The compiler of VIII Enoch, working in the 3rd or 4th century BCE, wove these traditions together without fully resolving the tension between them. The result is a narrative that is slightly internally inconsistent. Semyaza leads, but Azazel receives the harshest judgment. But also, perhaps paradoxically, theologically richer for that inconsistency. Because the tension forces a question: what is the worse sin? Is it worse to lead others into transgression, to organize rebellion, to demand an oath, to bear responsibility for 200 beings who fall with you? Or is it worse to arm the consequences, to take what the rebellion has opened up and fill it with weapons, to teach the means of violence to beings who had no such means before? The Semyaza tradition says, the leader bears ultimate responsibility. His name comes first. His speech is preserved. His anxiety about bearing the penalty alone is the text's moral center of gravity. The Azazel tradition says, the teacher is the greater danger. You can recover from a boundary violation. You cannot unteach the sword. Both of these are serious moral positions. The tension between them is not a textual flaw to be explained away. It is the text's deepest gift to its readers. What makes this especially interesting is the contrast with later tradition, when the fallen angel story migrates into mainstream religious consciousness. Through early Christian literature, through the development of Satanology, through the long process by which the adversary becomes the devil we know, it tends to consolidate around a single figure with a single motivation. Lucifer's pride, the morning star's refusal to bow. The corruption is located in hubris, in the individual's claim to equal God. The Enochic tradition is doing something far more complex. It has two leaders with two different kinds of sin, organizational transgression and technological corruption, and it refuses to fully adjudicate between them. That refusal is, I would argue, more honest about the nature of moral catastrophe than the consolidated Lucifer narrative that eventually replaced it. Real catastrophes rarely have a single cause or a single most guilty party. They are usually the product of exactly this kind of compound failure. A leader who organizes transgression, and a specialist who operationalizes it, with neither one fully reducible to the other. The canonical text of VIII Enoch does not tell us everything. And when the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered between 1947 and 1956 in the caves of Qumran, one of the most remarkable finds was a collection of Aramaic fragments from a lost text called the Book of Giants. The Book of Giants is, in many ways, the sequel to the Watcher's story. It preserves what happened to the Nephilim as the flood approached. Their dreams, their growing awareness of the coming catastrophe, their desperate attempts to understand what they had inherited. The giants have nightmares. They send messengers to Enoch, who is in heaven, to ask him to interpret what they have seen. Enoch's answer is grim. Some of the fragments name Semyaza's children directly. His sons are among the dreaming giants. And in the tradition preserved in these fragments, there is a pathos to the Nephilim that is absent from the summary account in 1st Enoch. They did not ask to be born. They did not choose their inheritance. They are, in some sense, the first victims of their father's transgression, beings too large for the world they were born into, carrying the consequences of a pact sworn before their existence on a mountain summit on a night they cannot remember. Semyaza himself becomes, in later Jewish demonological tradition, the figure of Semyaza. His name slightly altered, his role elaborated, his status as chief of the fallen watchers maintained even as his character is increasingly demonized. In the Hekhalot literature, the mystical Jewish texts of late antiquity concerned with heavenly ascent and the divine throne, Semyaza appears as one of the rulers of the lower angelic realms, a figure of dangerous power who must be named and negotiated with. In the medieval Jewish mystical tradition of the Zohar, Semyaza and Azazel are invoked as the two fallen angels who taught humanity forbidden arts. The dual tradition now fully merged, the tension between them resolved into complementarity rather than competition. In Arabic tradition, filtered through Islamic sources, the two angels become Harut and Marut, the beings mentioned in the Quran's 2nd chapter, who were sent to Babylon and who taught humanity magic, while warning them that they were a trial and that those who learned from them would lose their souls. The moral structure is remarkably similar to the Enochic account: beings who transgress a boundary, who offer humanity something it shouldn't have, who warn against the very thing they are doing. The self-aware transgressor as teacher of transgression. In European esoteric tradition, Semyaza surfaces in grimoires and demonological catalogues under various spellings: Semyaza, Samyaza, Shamyaza, usually identified as one of the ruling princes of fallen angelic hierarchies. His role as organizer-in-chief is consistently maintained even when the surrounding mythology has been dramatically transformed. What is remarkable about this survival is not merely the longevity, though 2.5 millennia is extraordinary, but the consistency. Across traditions, across languages, across cultural contexts that share almost nothing else, Semyaza remains the leader, the one who spoke first, the one who demanded the oath, the one who knew and proceeded anyway. It is as though the tradition understood that this figure contained something irreducible, something that couldn't be absorbed into the Lucifer narrative, couldn't be folded into the single rebel story of pride and fall. The leader who doubts himself, who fears abandonment, who constructs a mechanism of mutual binding precisely because desire alone is not sufficient. This is a different kind of fallen figure than the proud morning star, and different enough that it has kept his name alive in one form or another across the entire span of the tradition. Let us step back from the theology for a moment and ask a different kind of question. Why does the figure of Semyaza feel so contemporary? He is not a simple villain. The Book of Enoch doesn't give us a monster. It gives us a figure who is acutely aware of the moral weight of what he is doing, aware of it before he does it, and who proceeds anyway. Not from ignorance, not from deception, from desire, from fear of abandonment, and from the remarkable managerial insight that desire alone cannot sustain a conspiracy. In 1961 and 1962, a social psychologist named Stanley Milgram conducted a series of experiments at Yale University that would become the most discussed, debated, and disturbing experiments in the history of social science. Milgram wanted to understand how ordinary people had committed the atrocities of the Second World War. Specifically, how ordinary German bureaucrats, soldiers, and civilians had participated in systematic murder. His method was to see whether ordinary American volunteers, placed in a situation where an authority figure directed them to administer what they believed were increasingly painful electric shocks to another person, would comply. The answer, to the horror of almost everyone who encountered the results, was most of them would. The majority of Milgram's subjects continued administering what they believed were dangerous and potentially lethal shocks, not because they were monsters, but because the situation, the authority figure, the institutional setting, the incremental escalation, constructed a context in which individual moral judgment was progressively overridden. Milgram's most chilling finding was not about individual compliance. It was about groups. When subjects were placed in situations where other people were also complying, compliance rates increased dramatically. The social bond, the awareness that others were doing the same thing, made individual defection almost psychologically impossible. Semyaza understood this 25 centuries before Milgram ran his first experiment. He knew that 200 beings who wanted the same thing would still struggle to actually do that thing without a mechanism of mutual commitment. He knew that desire creates the motivation, but the group creates the momentum. And that once the group has sworn, the individual can no longer bear the social cost of being the one who refuses. This is not a minor psychological insight buried in an ancient text. It is a precise description of how moral catastrophe actually propagates through organizations, militaries, corporations, and bureaucracies. The leader who says, "I know this is wrong, but if I don't do it alone, at least let's do it together." This is a recognizable figure. We have seen this figure in every major institutional failure of the modern era. The diffusion of moral responsibility through group commitment is one of the most powerful forces in human social life. Semyaza weaponized it. He didn't merely suggest transgression. He institutionalized it, gave it a ritual form, created a sworn community of the transgressed in which no individual could stand outside and say, "Not me." And there is something else in Semyaza's speech before the oath that deserves attention. Something more intimate and more troubling than the mechanics of group dynamics. He says, "I fear that perhaps you will not agree to this deed, and I alone will have to pay the penalty." This is not the speech of a confident tyrant. This is the speech of someone afraid of abandonment, afraid of being the only one who falls. The desire that drives Semyaza to the summit of Hermon is the same desire that drives him to demand the oath, the desire not to be alone in his transgression. There is a profound, uncomfortable truth in this that the text seems to offer without commentary. Some of the most destructive acts in human and, in this tradition, cosmic history have been committed not by the powerful and the confident, but by the frightened and the desperate, by figures who needed others to validate their transgression, to share the weight of it, to make it real by making it collective. The leader who recruits followers into wrongdoing is not always the strong one. Sometimes they are the most afraid. Here is perhaps the most interesting question of all. Why did Lucifer win? The Lucifer tradition, the morning star who fell from pride, whose rebellion was solo and majestic, whose sin was the refusal to acknowledge a higher power, is theologically and narratively tidier than the Enochic account. Pride is a sin that makes sense to individuals. The rebel who falls alone can become the adversary who works alone. The devil is singular tempter, singular enemy, singular explanation for the presence of evil in a created good world. This is a theologically coherent and institutionally manageable story. The Semyaza tradition is harder to manage. 200 rebels is not a devil. It is a faction. And a faction within the divine order implies something about the divine order itself, that it contains the possibility of organized dissent, that it can produce beings capable of self-aware collective transgression, that the boundary between heaven and earth is not metaphorical, but porous and negotiable. The knowledge problem that Azazel represents is, if anything, even more theologically difficult. If forbidden knowledge was transmitted to humanity by divine beings who knew it was forbidden, what does that say about human responsibility for using that knowledge? The Watcher tradition implicitly complicates the doctrine of human free will in ways that institutional religion has generally preferred to avoid. And there is a further problem. The Book of Enoch's account of the flood ties the catastrophe specifically to the Watcher's transgression and its consequences. The flood is not a response to human sin in the Enochic account. It is a response to the Nephilim and the chaos they have created. This is a significantly different theological structure from the Genesis account, and it raises uncomfortable questions about guilt, responsibility, and divine response that the simpler Genesis narrative neatly sidesteps. The exclusion of the Book of Enoch from the canon, whatever its specific historical motivations, had the effect of removing from mainstream tradition the most complex and morally sophisticated account of angelic rebellion that the ancient world produced. In its place, the single figure of Lucifer, proud, isolated, comprehensible, could serve as the tradition's face of cosmic evil. What was lost in that substitution was not merely a narrative, it was a moral vocabulary. The vocabulary of collective transgression, of self-aware wrongdoing, of the leader who knows the cost and proceeds anyway, not from pride but from fear, not from power but from longing, of the punishment that mirrors the sin in the structure of what it is, of the question whether the organizer or the teacher is the greater danger to the world. These are not questions that have clean answers. They are questions that have kept philosophers, theologians, and moral thinkers busy for centuries, and they deserve the full weight of the tradition that generated them. The recovery of the Book of Enoch, first through the Ethiopian manuscripts and then through the Dead Sea Scrolls, has given us back some of that vocabulary. Semyaza stands at its center, the leader who doubts himself, who fears abandonment, who constructs a mechanism of mutual destruction and then leads 200 beings down a mountain toward consequences he already knows are irreversible. He is not Lucifer. He is something older than Lucifer, something stranger, something that the long institutional history of Western religion found too difficult to preserve, which may, in the end, be the most telling thing about him. There is still a mountain at the northern edge of what was once Canaan. Mount Hermon still rises above the surrounding landscape, its peak still visible on clear days from distances that surprised ancient travelers. In winter, it is snow-covered. In summer, a strange, isolated cold persists near its summit that the ancients took as a sign of its sacred character. It was different from the land around it. It seemed to belong to a different order. The Book of Enoch does not tell us what happened on that summit after the Watchers descended. It doesn't describe the mountain left empty, the place where the oath was sworn, standing silent under the same stars that had been called to witness what was done there. But it preserves the speech. 2,500 years later, we still have Semyaza's words before the descent. I fear that perhaps you will not agree to do this deed, and I alone will have to pay the penalty for this great sin. The speech of a leader who knew. There is a temptation when we encounter a figure like Semyaza to reach for easy moral categories. He is the villain. He corrupted the world. The punishment fits the crime. But the text will not quite let us do that. It insists on the speech. It insists on the fear. It insists on the precise mechanism of the oath, not because Semyaza was proud, but because he was afraid of being alone in his transgression. This is not the portrait of a cosmic monster. It is the portrait of someone who wanted something he was not supposed to want, who understood perfectly well that wanting it would cost everything, and who found that the cost was insufficient to stop him. How familiar that portrait is. How much of the history of human wrongdoing, individual, collective, institutional, is contained in that single structure. I know this is wrong. I know what it will cost. Let us swear an oath so that none of us can turn back. What we do with that portrait is, perhaps, the real question the Book of Enoch is asking. Not, who was Semyaza? Not, where is he now, bound under the earth or suspended between the stars? But, do you recognize him? Because the summit of Hermon is not a myth. It is a structure, and structures repeat.